So are advances in genetic science and technology changing the conversation about membership, if it is at all?
Well, what has happened is I think it's pretty pervasive in the United States now, and I've also seen it among First Nations in Canada, that tribal governments are using DNA testing, but not the genetic ancestry testing that comes from human population genetics that I was talking about. They're using DNA parentage tests. So the DNA profile that's used in, say, for forensic science or criminal cases, or when you just need to do a paternity test. That's a really different kind of DNA test. But what they're doing is, quite often, if parentage is in question, it's paternity, obviously. And if somebody, say, needs to document their paternal line in order to show what their lineal descent is from a base roll, so the base tribal rolls that were put together around the allotment time, or if they need to prove their blood quantum, they may need that father's lineage. And if it's not sure that the person they're claiming as their father is their biological father, they'll come in and do a DNA test. This is pretty pervasive. Now, most tribes will do it on a case-by-case basis, but what you have seen, and this has gotten tribal enrollment even more bad press, is you've seen a very few very wealthy casino tribes with very small populations who divide up casino benefits among individual tribal members. And in those very wealthy tribes, this can be $1 million a year or something per member. Those tribes have moved to across the board DNA testing. And they have actually ended up, of course, if you go into a room and you DNA test everybody for parentage, you're going to come out with some falsely attributed biological parentage in there. You could have it as high as 10%. People don't have the biological father they think they have. So that's what happens if you go in and test a whole population, right? And then some people have gotten thrown off the rolls because they were tracing their descent from somebody listed on a base roll, and there's a break there in lineage, right?
So you go into depth in your book about how genetic testing companies are very specifically targeting Native American people and tribes. At least some of them are. What's going on here, and why are they targeting Native American tribes specifically?
Well, so I've seen DNA testing companies pop up that are selling the genetic ancestry test to the public, people that are interested in researching their family tree, and that's all really interesting. But they might also offer paternity tests, because I think there's probably, I don't know what the breakdown is in terms of profit, but there's a good market for paternity testing. And so these same companies who might have, researchers involved that are doing the genetic ancestry stuff are also, trying to make money off selling paternity tests. And so, they're trying to make money, right? And so they'll go to tribal conferences. There are different national tribal conferences that happen, and they'll set up with a lot of, at the trade show that happens. I've seen this happen at National Congress of American Indians, which is a huge annual conference. I've heard of it happening at the National Indian Gaming Association conferences, where they'll set up on the trade show floor and talk to tribes about DNA testing. So, they're companies trying to make money like anybody else. I don't see an agenda beyond that, although what I do see them doing is sort of preaching this idea that there is some scientifically objective way to do your membership based on DNA testing. And of course, that's not true. Membership is highly politicized. It's highly subjective. And you can decide to plug a DNA test in to support those political decisions or not. But there is no scientifically neutral way to decide who should be a member of a tribe or not.
You talk a little bit in the book about some of the problematic messaging that you were seeing in some of the marketing efforts, things about being able to scientifically tell whether or not someone's ancestry belongs to a very specific tribe.
Right, which is completely false. And what that tells me is that the genetic scientists doing this work don't understand the way that tribe is defined. They are conflating a tribal community or a First Nation with a biological or a genetic population. Now, first of all, on the scientific front, there's already huge debates and problems with acting as if any genetic population is ever a discrete thing. So you've got lots of social scientists and historians of science who really take to task scientists who use the word population population in a way that retains too many old school racial ideas. That's a whole body of literature. But aside from that, aside from the problems with how one defines population genetically, we also have how one defines a tribe socially and politically, and scientists, for the most part, don't understand that history. So tribes are certainly comprised of people that are related biologically, but you have to go back to the era of colonization, largely in the 19th century, post-Indian Wars, when the reservation era happened, and you had different bands of people put together on different reservations. These large, thriving, intricately connected indigenous communities and kinship groups were kind of severed and put onto these little reservation land bases. And so they, for example, made tribes out of peoples that hadn't previously maybe been living that closely together. They put multiple tribes onto one reservation. Again, everything was designed for the ease of land management and Indian containment by the federal government. So geneticists go into these communities, and what they're interested in is taking a sample from a person who ideally has 4 grandparents who are from that quote unquote tribe. They're looking for a level of populational purity that just can't exist when these tribes are placed on these land bases during a time of colonial relocation and removal, not to mention all of the ways in which Indigenous people move around in the 20th century. There was relocation to boarding schools. There was the termination era in the 1950s, in which the federal government terminated tribes, tried to take away native status from people, and then they found out that didn't work as an assimilation tactic, so they reconstituted tribes. There is the fact that a native person from one tribe might go to boarding school somewhere and meet somebody who's Navajo, and then they get together and they have children, and so suddenly you've got these Indigenous people who have lineages in multiple official tribal communities. I mean, it's like they think that Native people just sit around on the reservation and marry each other and never move around. We're highly mobile post-colonization, and our ancestors were highly mobile pre-colonization. So this conflation of assuming that a tribe is a biological population is kind of scientifically nonsensical, and it's politically and socially nonsensical.